we've got big problems under money in the Christian church. What's wrong?
So,
and I'm defining Christian big, wide. Some of it I wouldn't even be comfortable calling Christian. Yeah.
So first, I want to own the responsibility.
Yeah.
So I teach as a visiting professor at 7 seminaries in 4 countries because we haven't talked much about money in the seminary setting.
Yeah.
Though it was a pretty popular topic for Jesus.
Yeah.
So I want to speak not from a place of finger pointing, but own that we've not done a good job at the seminary level. Now that said, when it's been taught, because we haven't done a very good job at it, it's often led people kind of 4 places, I like to say. First is if we take Old Testament covenant promises out of context, so we're like not rightly dividing the word of truth.
Yeah.
If we look at the money passages in the Old Testament that were proclaimed to God's people Israel, and we like apply them to us today, that leads to what's commonly known as prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
So in other words, like have you ever been driving somewhere and you got off track and you want to know how you got off track? If you wanna, the wrong road you take to end up in prosperity gospel is taking Old Testament covenant promises out of context. You'll end up there every time.
How do they do it?
Well, I mean, that's how they do it. They literally, Deuteronomy 28. If you do this, if you follow my commands, your bread's going to rise, your calves are going to drop, you're going to be the head and not the tail, like all these things are going to happen. And then they tell people, look, if you do all these things, this is going to happen for you. And you want your breakthrough to happen. And then that's what they proclaim. And so I'm saying that you'll end up prosperity gospel every time. And there's nothing.
It's a different Jesus, isn't it?
Oh, it's not a gospel at all. Because it's not good news. Because it actually sends people to a place of really a place of thinking that they're the ones who are trying to make some temporal results happen. That's the first area that disgusts me. The second area is, I call, first one's prosperity, second one's slavery. So if you look at Old Testament and New Testament, in America, we have a sandwich. I think you guys maybe we would take peanut butter and jelly, put them together. Maybe yours is Vegemite or something. But peanut butter and jelly, well, those two make a great sandwich. Putting them together is like taking the law in this hand and the gospel of grace in this hand. And that, according to Galatians, sends us back to slavery. And so if we look at, say, tithe teaching in the Old Testament, first of all, in the Old Testament, the tithe was 3 tithes. You had the first tithe that went to God. So what would that do? That would connect us to God. The second tithe was for the festivals. And notice that connects us with each other. Yeah. Deuteronomic scholar Gordon McConville at the University of Gloucestershire taught me that giving, that second tithe, was the glue in the community. Then the third tithe, that was every 3 years, they'd bring a third tithe for the aliens and the strangers and the Levites who had no land on which to grow things, right? And that would care for God's servants and the needy among them. And so notice, the Deuteronomic law is intended to teach us to be connected to God and one another through our giving. But as we move into the New Testament, we don't see Jesus with disciples ever using tithe language. Why? It's law language. It would send us back to slavery. And I mean, that's my own story. Like growing up, my pastor taught tithe, so I ticked off the box, and then I was prideful. And then I thought the other 90% was mine, and I became just like the religious leaders, a greedy lover of money. And so when I say that if you teach the tithe, you're really sending people back to slavery. 2 more. First, prosperity. Second, slavery. Third, I'm going to say, so there's assonance, culturally. If you're proclaiming a message that sounds good culturally, it's probably another gospel. Yeah. In other words, oh yeah, like giving becomes all about give to the things you care about. Now that would be great if I was the owner of those resources, but the reality is I'm only a steward. They're God's resources. So we need to give to the things that God cares about. The money we possess is not ours. So I tell people, in the words of Richard Foster, your giving shouldn't be, oh, how much of my money should I give to God? That's the cultural message. It should be, how much of God's money do I need to keep for myself?